that would help you define mental health? Okay.
I would think of mental peace.
Mental peace. What else when you think of mental health? What are you looking for?
The health of how you're thinking and dealing with situations.
The health of how you're thinking and dealing with situations. And lights.
In touch with reality.
In touch with reality.
Or not.
I'm sorry?
Or not.
Or not. Sure, everything has an opposite, sort of a problematic disease on the one side and health and kind of well-being on the other. What else? Confusion, or maybe the opposite, sort of clarity or capacity to focus or no. What else?
The ability to interact or be social.
The ability to interact and be social. Part of what we can do is begin to get in our minds what we're thinking mental health is. And what it is or would be for us, and what those characteristics are. And that gives us an opportunity to have this connect to something for you, which is, okay, so what's your view? What's your sort of challenge? What's your opportunity? What are you thinking about that would make your life and the life of others more mental health well-being? But now, if I change the slide, I am encouraging your pastor to be more healthy and well by now running, which is good. But if you left out mental and just said, what are our definitions of health? See, what would that mean?
Not sick.
Not sick, which would mean sick what? Sick what? Not sick?
Not unhealthy body, physically.
Body, not body, sick.
Physical health.
Physical health or illness.
Well-being and energy. It isn't just the absence of illness.
Okay. You sound like you've been in the field. Because, and I'll say this in another context when we're talking about it, the United States currently spends 95% of its gross national, take that back. The United States spends 18% of its gross national product on health care in the United States. Far beyond any other industrialized country in the world, like 2 or 3 times more than gross national product. But our results are inferior to most of those countries. That is, we're not doing as good a job health-wise. Of that 18% of our gross national product that has to do with health care, 95% of it is on treating disease. Only 5% is on health, well-being, and prevention. So part of the deal, just stimulated by your comment, is that when we begin to think of health, a lot of times it goes to the illness side, that is when we are not healthy. But one of the things that we can begin to think about is what is it that we can put into our lives and the lives of those around us that keeps us as healthy and well as possible, stimulating wellness, but also stimulating prevention. And it would be nice to talk probably to do more of that, since we still are in a medical model in which we get energized when we get sick, not when we get well. I learned to exercise more after I had a couple of medical issues that did it, not just to exercise because it was a good thing, for instance. But think about health and mental health. And the idea is maybe they're all related in some way. That is, to just talk about mental health apart from a more holistic model of what's around you and what your lifestyle is, really narrows the subject pretty much, because we are basically people who, if you think holistically, every part of our lives interacts every other part. "30 years ago, I think, some obscure researcher somewhere doing a master's degree decided to measure, to take measurements that hospitals had when they did blood analysis and study of women who presented to hospital emergency rooms who were presenting having been abused physically. Just a wondering. Let's study the blood work and see if we can find anything in these women. You know what they found? They found that the women who were being abused had a significantly compromised immune system, with all the measurements of immune system. That started a whole line of research around what affects the immune system, and we discovered pretty clearly, because we have that discovery now, pretty clearly as part of our documentation now, that if you are in chronically problematic, conflicted, and unhappy relationships with people generally, your body is responding and your immune system is weakening. That is, you're more susceptible to disease. And if you're in positive, engaged relationships in which you're feeling loved, cared for, respected, understood, generally speaking, your immune system is stronger. Thus, your whole body is more immune to physical disease. Now, that's pretty clear. That is, chronic, conflicted, and hostile relationships between people help people get sick. Positive relationships between people help people get healthier or stay healthy. Now, there obviously is conditions in which that is not true for other reasons, but the fundamental principle is there. So the idea is, generally speaking, with all that sort of intro stuff, to begin to think about health and mental health in a larger concept than just what happens to your emotions or your head. And to begin to think about its relationship to your entire life and how your life in general is affecting your health and well-being. Now that gets us into all kinds of things, and this would be longer than a day, but for instance, it gets us to something that stimulates this and your pastor's interest in this, which is what happens post-COVID. That is, what kind of events. COVID is a physical happening in which we are affected by a microbe we can't see that affects the planet and is quite was and continues to be in some cases quite traumatic. Question becomes not just the treatment of the disease, but what's its effect holistically. So the idea, so we'll get there a little bit. But my encouragement is that when you think about mental illness, you think holistically. And the general way to think about this is it has relationships to do with your body, with your mind. We're talking picture language, well, not with body, of course. With others, and with God. With the understanding or the sense that your relationship with other people, that's the immune system idea, your relationship with other people will affect your mind and body, and might even affect your relationship to God. Or what's going on in your body may affect, will affect, have an influence in some way on your mind, on your relationships, and maybe on your relationship with God. And your relationship with God, there's lots of, those of you who will be focusing a bit on this in Bible class tomorrow morning. Your relationship to God is all over the Psalms in its and a little bit in Proverbs, among other places. Your relationship to God has, and its connection to health, well-being, mental health. So if this is a very sort of long intro that establishes for me the basic point with which we work, and I hope you'll take with you. And you know, you hear this line from speakers all the time, if there's one thing that you take with you at the end of the day, I hope it's this, you know, that kind of business. Well, here you go. If there's one thing that I want you to take at the end of the day, it is really that this business about holism is really an important issue. And be thinking mind, body, others, spirit. Or in other contexts, God, as in Scripture, revealed in Jesus, relationship with others, and my relationship to myself. Assumedly, your relationship to yourself will affect your overall health, right? If I'm feeling really lousy about myself, that's one inner conflict that will affect my immune system. So to begin to think about that, some years ago, we put together this. It's going to be a little probably hard to read, so I will get over here if that's okay. Yeah. Or maybe not. Maybe that's just my expectation. A wholeness wheel from a Lutheran perspective. The basic difference is, I'll point out, the axle or the center of the wheel is our baptism. And what is our baptism? What does it do? It puts us into a new relationship with God and creates a relationship in the community for us. That is, it creates through Jesus the washing of water and the Word. Through that, baptism, we are made right with God, and we become members of the Christian community that St. Paul calls the body of Christ. So our baptism is vertical, but it is also horizontal. New relationship with God through Jesus, new relationship with each other, with other people who are followers of Jesus, who have been washed by the blood of Jesus, who gather together in community. So that forms the center. Around all these other things in the pies of the wheel is spiritual well-being. And that's what makes the baptism makes us different from most secular wellness wheels. And it being surrounded by spiritual well-being makes it more different, because usually in secular wellness wheels, spirituality is a piece of the pie. And you've got pieces of the pie being this. Here, spirituality becomes the piece or the rubber, in some ways, around which the air of the pie, I'm mixing metaphors, I'm really sorry, that doesn't work. Those of you who cook, what would it be? I guess the cover, the heaven's knows. Just bear with me on the picture, which is obviously limited in some ways or another. But it's surrounded by, it keeps the pie together, keeps the tire together. Built on the baptism, our spirituality encompasses and contains around, everything becomes spiritual for us and held together that way. Then within that are lots of characteristics, or places, things that we do or are involved in. Vocational well-being, social interpersonal well-being, so you've got work or hobbies, or anything that looks sort of vocational. Social interpersonal well-being, the interactive part of things. Emotional well-being, in terms of our feelings and our emotions. Physical well-being, in terms of how we're doing bodily. Intellectual well-being. The Lutheran Church Extension Fund that does the finances of the church has also added to this wheel financial well-being. Which I groaned a little bit, and I'm putting this because it's the original wheel. But you know what? If you're worried about finances, it affects your mind, your body, and your experience. So it really does belong there. Because it was created, actually they asked permission to do it from us. It was created by a financial organization, and I go, a little bit, because I have a vested interest. But it's actually true. So let's go back to this. If that's possible. We can only go forward.
We can go.
This is good, because I found a way. I always want to encourage people's physical well-being. So if we went forward and then I ask regularly that we have to go back, do you have to then get up and run every time?
I'll do it. He's teaching me to just be more patient.
Oh, hopefully we will not do that. So this is basically the wellness kind of a model that has to do with the integration that I talked about before. That when you begin to think about mental illness or mental health, think more broadly than just what happens, what's like in a diagnostical manual, or in a way that we in a disease model put things like anxiety disorder, or depression, or bipolar disorder, or schizoaffective disorder, or for me, it's not in the DSM-3. I tried to get it in. They wouldn't allow me to get it in, actually. For me, I want a diagnostic category of technological anxiety. Because whenever I do this kind of stuff, I'm scared the technology doesn't work. And by the way, when I was looking this morning at my computer, I found that one of the two pieces here on the computer was no longer in it, in my PowerPoints, which created a really interesting thing. So I went down, got a cup of tea, and it was kind of all better because I could find it. But I also had it on a thumb drive. But in thinking about that, sorry about the digression into my anxiety. If you think about that, what you've got then is essentially an idea that you're not going after a definitive little piece of things when you're talking about mental health. It's really a more holistic, broad question that has particular foci in certain things that are classically in the realm of mental or mind-body. But you're really talking about larger issues as well, and need to do that. In the United States, for instance, if you are living below the poverty level, you are 6 times more likely to have a physical diagnosable disease. That is, there is something about economic here and capacity to live or have enough money to access health care stuff that connects to the health issues. When I was in Syracuse, New York, at the Onondaga Pastoral Counseling Center, infant mortality in Syracuse was equal to a third world country. In urban Syracuse. Because the conditions of poverty and relationships which made people in poverty situations or below an adequate financial situation made access to health care a problem. So in that sense, sure, we can put a lot of money into treating, but the real issue is how people are living and opening access to available health care. Now, here's my thing at the moment. So does this make sense? Okay, so you're kind of with me, I what I was saying. So we do have this, and then there are all kinds of things that even surround the wheel, like hobbies, marriage and family, play for humor, professional responsibilities. Lots of things that go around there that are characteristic. But the one piece is the interactive piece. Think holistically and, think holistically. And to that end, I'm going to focus for a good part of the rest of this on personal relationships. Because if I have a personal relationships which have certain positive characteristics to them, the rest of my health in the wheel will be, the chances are it will be better. And if there are other aspects of the wheel that are in trouble, I will have more opportunity to communicate and share what's going on so that I will not be alone or isolated with what my experience is. In this, I am quite indebted to a theoretician, researcher by the name of John Gottman, who has been studying marriage and family relationships for over 30 years in his marriage lab. And from him comes the piece about human relationships, but it goes directly to not only the health and well-being issue, but how it is that you talk to people, that you need to talk to people about their mental health or yours. Because how you're going to talk to them, how you're going to have conversations is a really significant, probably central piece to being able to have an engagement in relationship to this. So, now we can go forward. Gottman suggests, think about bids. Bids being our connection. I'm bidding with you all the time because I'm right here, right now, because I'm wanting to have a connection enough so that whatever the Spirit wants you to engage in terms of your own life and the life of others, you will do so as a result of just being here. And in order to do that, you need to think that I'm not totally off my rocker. And there needs to be a way that we're engaged because we know that people will learn better and engage better if they got at least a reasonably good relationship with their in a class, their instructor, or with whatever. I have had relationships in my life with instructors who were teaching me cognitive knowledge, but I really ended up forgetting practically everything that I learned because I didn't like them, or they were obnoxious, or that I didn't have a relationship with them. When I think of seminary, both teaching it but also being a student, what do I remember about seminary? I remember the teachers that were humanly close to me and what they taught. Way more than I do the sort of objective reality of seminary. So I'm bidding, but we bid with each other all the time. The definition in a book, The Relationship Cure, which is a really good book if you wish to read such a thing. It's John Gottman, The Relationship Cure. And right at the beginning, the way people in mundane moments in everyday life make attempts at emotional communication, and how others around them respond or fail to respond to these attempts. It's really how they connect, how they bid, both verbally and also physically bid. So they're fundamentally, this is a really broad brush stroke, but there are fundamentally three kinds of bids or connections. One is what's called turning toward. And turning toward is to react in a positive way to another's bid for communication. Somebody comes up to you and says, well, hi, how are you? And you respond with, I'm well, but how are you? Or you respond with, oh, hi. Or you respond with at least, That is, there are all these things in a turning toward, as well as listening, that have to do with making a connection. If you have, of course you've had this, well, I don't know, I'm assuming you've had this experience, in which you come to somebody and you say, well, how are you? Or, welcome to church, or something like that. That's a bid, right? And your bid, or the other side, you go to another church that you haven't been at, maybe you're traveling or something like that, and you walk in and nobody bids. So what happens? I've walked in, I love walking into a church where I'm anonymous. Because everybody thinks their church is friendly. But it's because you know each other, you've got a relationship, there's been successful bids. But I walked into parishes in which nobody's talked to me. I'm obviously, I don't think I look like a gargoyle. That people would keep me away. So I walk in and it's there. I sit. I may be greeted afterwards by maybe the pastor as I walk out or something like that, who tends to be more responsive to bids. Frankly, I'm not going back. I don't care how pure their doctrine is when they are not responding to bids by turning toward. Now, my goodness. Do you think that would get me kicked out of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod? But I'll risk it with you. That people do not, there's this old line, they don't know how much, they're not going to agree with, it's sort of like they don't agree with what you think until they know that you care. But that's the bidding thing. So part of the deal is really, how do you bid? And can you bid in a larger congregation? Or, to our topic today more narrowly, if someone is, you believe, having a issue that is mental illness, mental concern, that gives you concern and maybe other people's concern, how do you bid in a way that, rather than just stay away because you're afraid to raise it, which is another kind of non-bidding, or observe and not wonder, but actually get involved in a conversation and bid, which is really, hey, let's talk about this. I really would like to talk to you. So turning towards, react in a positive way to somebody who comes at you. Another alternative, however, is turning against. People who are turning against one another's bids for connection might be described as belligerent or argumentative. Someone comes up to you and says, says something a bit confrontational for you. Like, a visitor comes in and says, now, why does your pastor believe this? And you say, you must be an inferior follower of Jesus because you don't believe what my pastor says. That's turning against. It's criticizing the other person and attacking them for their bid. I really need help. Is a bid. You must be really weak to need help. Is turning against. I have a concern. I'm just not feeling as close to God as I used to. Well, you must be deep in sin. Repent, you sinner. That's turning against. Okay? And finally, turning away is relating generally involves ignoring another's bid or acting preoccupied. How about if we get together and talk about a significant issue going on in my life? Sure. And how did the Rangers do last night? I don't know, how did they do last night? Well, I turned them on at 5-3 when they were losing. I didn't. Ignoring the other bid. When people come into your parish and are not, there's no bidding, it really is a bid from the people in the parish. It's a turning away bid. When our kids, our sons now fully grown and parents themselves, we talk about their childhood. Because actually I believe that our two sons are frankly much better fathers than I was, given what they're doing to their kids and what I was not able, I mean for lots of reasons, including financial and struggling and all that, to be. So we have these conversations every once in a while about what it was like for them to be a young child of me. And it's really interesting, but one of them is, and sometimes quite painful, but one of them is, well, sometimes, Dan, you'll remember that, so we come home and there might have been something we want to talk about, and we kind of trying to get around to it or something like that, but you were working on something and too busy. The too busy is turned away. What you could say was, let me finish what I'm doing, and then let's get together. See, that's a delay, but it's not turning away. It's responding to the kinds of things that's actually there, the kinds of things that are actually there, and then be able to move in that direction. Ignoring often happens because you just simply take another agenda. I mean, if you had this conversation, somebody says something, and then somebody else just ignores it and goes something else in the conversation. It's turning away. At least there's a turning toward is a recognition of what people said. Turning away is to move away from it actively and not to engage it. When I was more in active practice and doing marital counseling with people, believe it or not, couples who came in actively arguing with each other were more likely to do better in counseling than people who were ignoring each other. Because people who ignore each other are really in separate worlds now. And there's not no life or energy to them. When people are actively fighting, they're actually got engagement with each other. And you begin to work at that. It's a longer road when people are walled against another person. And that sometimes happens in relationships as well. And fundamentally what we do often is to sort of ignore at that point. So we've got three things to be thinking about in terms of our responses to people and their responses to us. Because most of us need turning toward more. We turn toward, we bid, people respond to the bid. They pay attention to it. Maybe not immediately, but you know that they're heard and there's follow-up or however it works, or there's just this sort of eye contact of, yeah, let's talk, or let's get at this or something like that, that it really makes it possible in terms of relation link. And then there are, so that's what we need more. Generally speaking, you need 6 of these to counter one of the other. 6 turning towards to counter 1 being turned against. That is, negative always has more power, believe it or not, initially. So it's turning away, turning against, turning toward. You do three things. Okay. So turning toward is a one or two word comment, a few words or questions to clarify, attentive, high energy. Next, whatever comes next. Turning away is preoccupied, disregarding, or interrupting. Oh, I'm going to do that. Yeah, it's a kind of people. Even with people who they either finish their sentences for you or don't let you finish, you just interrupt the sentence. You aware of what that does to you emotionally? It's really quite something. Turning against is contemptuous, belligerent, contradictory, and domineering. And if anybody wants to follow up, you can have these PowerPoints and all that. These do translate into families, and they also translate into organizations and churches. Into things like coaching, which is, there's lots of turning toward each other as a characteristic, as a family or as a church or an individual conversation. Dismissing is, there's a lot of, dismissing going on. People are not paying attention to each other. They're ignoring what's going on. If you're in the middle of something that you're worried about with somebody and you're not raising it in a bidding point of view, that's sort of a dismissing piece. We're going to try to ignore it and see what see what happens. Disapproving is actively disapproving. There are lots of churches in which people are afraid to talk about what they need to talk about because they think they'll be disapproved. I did a small piece of research in which a family, couples that are beginning to have problems that were once church attenders will more likely not attend church because they're afraid that if they come to church or people find out about what's going on, that they will be judged for what's going on. That's a disapproving. And laissez-faire is a sort of other kind of article, other kind of way of thinking about it, in which fundamentally there's a ton of energy that goes on, and arguments end when people get exhausted. That is, there's just a lot of fury, but nothing really happens that people don't learn. Every once in a while you see that in current political or other kinds of debates or even church meetings, in which there's all this stuff, all this emotional interaction and stuff that goes on, but people are not learning from it. And then finally, somebody calls the motion or calls something, you vote on it, and it's over, but nothing's been learned. You just, come to a conclusion, really a forced conclusion. So, and coaching, which is turning toward in relationships and in organizations, everything is accepted to be put on the table. That doesn't mean everything that comes on the table is agreed with or is accepted. It means you can talk about anything here. About yourself, about what's going on, about what you think, about what you feel. So in coaching, or a philosophy of emotion, for organizations or for individuals or for families, you accept all feelings as being real for the person, whether or not you agree with the feeling or what the position is that they're taking. And this is very hard to do when you have strong feelings or strong thoughts about something, especially if they are not congruent with what it is that's being presented. But it is absolutely necessary in the bidding process, if you're going to talk about mental illness, things really personally involved to people for health issues, There needs to be the capacity to talk about it in ways that say, let's just put it on the table and talk about it. It's the difference when you see something from saying, what in the world is this? What are you doing? To, what you just did. What's this? Let's talk about it. See, there's a world of difference in a holistic world between how you come at stuff. And the idea, of course, is to come at stuff earlier rather than later. So express via in a family, trying to teach children how to express their feelings in ways that are appropriate and effective. And then dismissing is tend to keep their feelings hidden. That's what happens. Sometimes in organizational life, family life, and personal relationship life, is that stuff is simply not discussed. Did you grow up in a phrase, we talk about everything around the kitchen table except religion and politics? Well, that's a philosophy that says we're open in certain areas, but there are a couple that we're not, and so we're not going to, you don't bring it to the table. That, by the way, is going on a lot in America in family relationships these days with our hot political polarization. And so dismissing says is the keeping your feelings hidden, but they come in disapproving is actively criticizing people for bringing stuff to the table. Like you shouldn't, good LCMS Lutherans don't worry about that. Or if you're anxious, remember Jesus said, kind of don't be anxious, he'll take care of you, so quit it. Okay. And laissez-faire organizations, there's just a lot of energy, letting off steam, but once it's over, but it's not really over. Because the stuff just happens again the next time. Same thing, same pattern. Okay. We do know, this is a quote that I'm just going to read, families that create, now families, relationships, institutions that create emotion coaching environments fare much better than families that are dismissing, disapproving, or have a lazy attitude toward emotions. Couples who accept, respect, and honor each other's feelings are less likely to divorce. Their children tend to do better over the years as well because these emotion coaching families create environments that help children regulate their feelings. Their children, because they do that, their children can concentrate better than can kids in other groups. They get better grades in school. Now, this is not just opinion, this is research stuff. They have fewer behavior problems, they get along better with their peers, and lab results show that they have fewer stress-related hormones in their bloodstreams, and that over time they suffer from fewer minor health problems like coughs or colds. In short, it doesn't keep you from having a cough or a cold, and it doesn't keep you from having behaviors, but it lessens it and creates more capacity to handle stuff. Okay. There are some interactions that I'm going to do really quickly that really kill relationships and kill conversations, and you'll see them as follow-up ways of thinking about the turning toward, turning against, turning away. One is simply criticism, which is a criticism is really, in order to be a good critic, you need to always end a dispute with some attack on the person. So if you want a seminar on how to do good criticism, that's what I teach you. Which is, I really disagree with your view, but you always add, but you are a crumb and a bum for having that view. That is, you always have to add something about the person. Also in conflict management, it gets you into, that is the vehicle where conflict begins to deteriorate, into more difficult stuff when people begin to actually blame people. I use this with the permission of my wife. We do not have the same view about things like decorating the house and things. So we were in a particularly, midway in our marriage, we were in a particularly difficult question about what in the world to paint what paint to use on the wall. Which in the great scheme of things shouldn't affect my health, but in the course of it, basically, have you had this? You can feel your body and tension body raising in the midst of it. And we know that the more that happens, the less creative you'll be. It's how things escalate. Anyway, so we're having this conversation, and I'm saying, one thing I'm pretty adamant, and Judy is saying, well, she's trying to continue to bid, and whatever. But she finally has enough of me at that point and said, well, Bruce, you know that basically all your taste is in your mouth. Now, that was sort of interesting. And unfortunately, probably true. But that's the criticism. See, and that doesn't get us anywhere. Of course, when you get to the personal level, people are responding as you're attacking their personhood. And when you do that, then people push back. And then another one is the antidote is say what you feel. Use a gentle startup. We'll be talking about this a little more later. Focus on behavior, not on the person. I think you've been sadder these days. At least that's what it looks like to be. You think so? It's different though. You've been sad these days, and that sadness, you're not doing the work that you need to do around the house. You must be getting lazy. So there's a big difference in terms of bidding at that point. Defensiveness is just blaming the other person. It's always the other person's fault. So it isn't like owning, and the antidote is accept responsibility for at least a small part of the problem, which essentially is, well, okay, so let's talk about how the two of us work together on making this a problem. The next is contempt, which is really the most poisonous, which is you just dislike and are contempting of the other person. And if the message is you're kind of disgusted with somebody, it's hard, to get anything done. And this is the single best predictor, by the way, of a broken relationship. The idea is to create a culture of appreciation here. I'm running through these, but we'll talk hopefully in a little more depth about all this. In relationship to mental illness, and talking about mental illness. And stonewalling is just tuning out. Leave the room. Do it. And the way to think is soothe yourself. Take time out. What we do with our kids. Time's out, time out, go to your room is often not a punishment. It's just take a moment to deep breathe. The thing that they're teaching kids is candles. If you get worked up, you got 4 candles to blow out. What are you teaching the kid to do? Deep breathe, blow out, and buy some time. So the stone itself, that's the self-soothing that we do. Take a moment, I'll take a moment. Let me think about this a bit, that kind of business. So get back to the wholeness wheel, which essentially is we are holistically involved, interactively. This is interpersonal and all that, and we're in a holistic model at this point, from which we will be talking this afternoon about community life and mental health issues, and what you might be able to do. And I would look at this point, but I think we should stop at Psalm 139, which for me is the model of knowing each other, and is something like, Lord, you have known me. And the rest of the psalm is in all these different ways. We might come back to that devotionally or just to read it. But in that way, in those arenas, we learn how to know each other, and so foster health and well-being, and so foster discussions that are difficult conversations. Well, that's longer than it was supposed to be. So why don't you do what you do?
Actually, it's not all that longer. They're supposed to be right on time. So thank you.
Okay.
We have about 10 to 15 minutes. It's been a lot. A lot of it is what the purpose of the morning session is, and we'll get into the afternoon session here in a little bit. The purpose of the morning session is understanding that mental health is not just an issue out there and it's a hot buzzword topic, but the way we maintain our health mentally and holistically is in the everyday little tiny things. And that's hopefully what you're able to see this morning. So with that, there's a whole bunch of stuff just got presented. Any questions or comments? We have a few minutes for some questions and comments or thoughts that come to you. Just feel free to raise your hand. Pastor Ed, you got your hand up? Or are you scratching your ear?
Yeah, no. No, it was someone else. There is a lot. Thank you for the presentation. But something that came to my mind, even though I came late, I would say one of the hardest part, and it's got to do with all that you expressed, is to learn to ask for help. Dealing with people and all that, I mean, personally, I didn't realize that I need to ask for help. And it's always hard. Then what I would say is probably before we can be aware of other people, we need to be aware of our own needs. And that's, for me, it's been the hardest bridge, and actually working with people, especially the people who know you the most, the closer relationships. I would say start with your wife and your kids, and your family. It's very hard to take that step and say, hey, I need help. And if we don't do that, and that's what I'm dealing with right now with people and myself. But I guess awareness starts with that takeaway for pride. I don't know how to do it, I'm working on it. But I think it's in this time, with this conference, I'm very happy that the church is doing something. Then if you have some ideas and all that, how to facilitate that, I think that would be appreciated.
Shall I use the mic? Well, one thing, first not to do would be to say, well, you just ought to ask for help when you need help. That's a no. In terms of, you might say, but how does one, on the one hand, create an environment in which people can be more transparent and asking for help? The other piece is, how did we get, well, another piece, maybe not another, but, well, another piece is, how did we get that way in the first place? Well, that's part of self-reflection. I grew up in a significantly Germanic family in which we didn't. And I needed other communities to help me do that. And to be able to say, well, yeah, that is, I needed people to bid toward me. So the idea would be, you may not need, it's maybe hard to ask for help, but you can join communities and deepen relationships in which within those relationships continue to feel more and more safe, that may make it counter to your experience, which makes it hard to ask for help. The other piece is, are people around who make themselves available to you? Which is not quite what you're asking, but it does help. Like a lot of times I'll say something like, or I've said, I'm really, or will reach out when something's going on that I see on Facebook with a former student of mine, for instance. I'm likely to call, to interact with them. I'm involved in one that right now I'm having surgery and complications of that surgery, and I end up saying, you're not asking me for something, but I want you to know that I see this is going on, and if you want to talk, here I am. Here's how to get in contact with me. Let's talk. Interestingly, making myself available for people has helped me ask people to be available to me. Somehow it softened the edge of asking for help. So one piece is get involved with people who need help. It may soften your understanding of what you need. There is no pill you can take to allow you to do that more. Just the thought that relationships provide the opportunity, but it can't be forced, unless, of course, you go to pretty dramatic moves, and sometimes that's necessary in mental illness or other sorts of things. So, I don't think that that's in 3 steps answer to your question. But it's an attempt to recognize that a lot of us struggle or have struggled with that. And it, I think, has to do with seeking out relationships that can deepen so that at some point in that relationship, you're willing to ask what you need to ask for.
I think a big part of the problem for a long time has been, as a society, I think we're improving. Mental health issues are somehow our own fault. And so if you know someone, and I used to do these lessons with high school kids. Let's say someone was a smoker, and they smoked for 40 years, and they got lung cancer. We still don't blame them. We're like, oh, I'm so sorry that you have cancer. How can I help you? But yet if somebody is depressed, clinically, maybe it's a chemical imbalance in their body, we're still like, oh, you should get over that. You'd be happy. So it's the way our society approaches physical illness. Ooh, we need to take care of that. And I've seen this a lot as a teacher. If I were to say to a parent, your child has type 1 diabetes, they need insulin, that parent will be all over that. Oh, absolutely. But if I say, you might want to talk to your pediatrician, your child has some problems focusing, they might need some support with that. No, there's nothing wrong with my child, you need to teach better. So there's this huge divide. Yeah, I've heard that exact same thing. But there's this huge divide. Physical, we're going to take care of. Mental, you do that by yourself.
Yeah. connecting to this stuff though, so you bid, in the specific example that you used, you bid and you got back defensiveness. Yeah. Well, what I'd like you to do is have this material in mind and recognize what's happening. So then it's, how do you respond to that kind of, so you're saying, talk to your pediatrician about the capacity for the student to be focused. The response being, there's nothing wrong with my kid. It's your teacher. You're the teacher. Get continuing education on how to handle people. See, your blood pressure is going to go up. You're feeling defensive. The relationship, the conversation is not going to go very far. But you're thinking, turning toward, turning against, turning away, and saying to yourself, and do this early, because later in a conversation, when your heart is beating 100 beats a minute, you're probably not going to be aware of all this stuff. Oh, well, so how do I do? I've just been in an interaction that's defensive. Well, you're not really going to say it this way. Oh, so what you're struggling with is you really see the issue being me, not your child. Am I hearing this right?
Well, what I meant was I learned how to respond, but I think that's what makes it so hard to ask for help.
Well, sure, and that's a piece of, that's a cultural turning against or defensiveness. But if you're in a culture of turning against, how is it that you do anything? And that is, you keep working at turning toward. In this case, it might be, well, okay, so that's what you think. But the best I can do is just say, I think it would be a good idea. That is, you stay with the kernel communication that you're making. Don't allow yourself to be provoked and continue to turn toward. How does a culture change? By individual, I'm assuming, by individual communities forming appreciative relationships and communities in which turning toward is engaged and incarnated as followers of Jesus. It doesn't do us any good, actually, to end up turning against the culture, unless you're going to go off and form your own, little culture. You recognize it. It's not, what's that? It's, oh, this is what the culture is doing. I wonder how I might be different in the name of Jesus. It makes it managing one's anger, frustration. It's no fun to be defended from, or attacked. But it's, oh, okay. So I wonder how we might be different.
Well, I just think if we could somehow, and when I would teach this to kids, and we were talking about mental illness, we would take away the mental and just talk about illness. And again, in our culture, like you said, in our culture, physical illness, most people want to turn toward. Mental illness, they want to turn away.
So what's your strategy? You just said it, but I'm going to put it into words that you've heard today. Focus on the behavior, not on the person. You just said it, but not that way, of course. Which is, well, let's look at what's going on. In this case, let's look at what's going on in the classroom. Or let's look at how the focus is. You're focusing on behavior. So in conversations, you're wanting the cultural attitude to focus on the problem or the issue or the concern or the challenge, not on the people, which you end up using culturally. You use that as that becomes a scapegoat for your problems. If we just get rid of these people, or we just get rid of this person, or something like that, everything would be fine. And end up being more of a inquirer, turning toward culture. And if all the Christian churches in Texas or Maryland or wherever were examples of turning toward cultures, I would almost guarantee you in the name of Jesus that the larger culture is going to change.
That kind of glossing the point, and I think we're talking about the same. And I see it as a church, that's what we need to do. And yeah, all these things that we're taught, they're nice and all that, but I think we are way far behind. I think the first thing we need to do is have awareness, and you just mentioned. Something that I realized is we need to be aware of the behavior of people. And something that I realized, most people who's dealing with depression, destructive things and addictions and all that, one of the first things they do is isolate themselves. They just withdraw to the little space. They think that their problem is unique. And what I'm trying or I'm learning is identify the behaviors of people around us, or family, or members of church, friends. And if they are isolated themselves, probably we are not specialists, but it's kind of make believe and tell them, hey, it's okay to be not okay, kind of thing. And that will help within schools. But pretty much is we are way behind. We need to learn awareness to begin.
See, so a person is isolating themselves, right? So you see that, and you take the initiative to make a bid. And the bid is, I haven't seen you around. I've moved from them to you. I haven't seen you around, and I miss you. Or I haven't seen you around, I'm worried about you. That is, it becomes a point of connection or communication that ends up being a mutuality here. It's not just them. It's you, too. And that has to do with these sort of interactive piece. So that's part of the overall bidding process. If you're in a deeper relationship, that's way easier to do. But it's a doable piece that has no magic to it. It just offers the ongoing possibility and opportunity for it. Focusing on the behavior, which I think is sort of the core point, your core point as well, which essentially is we're working on an opportunity, a challenge, a struggle here that people have in this world. So let's see what we can do together about it. Because I'm really concerned, worried. Or I see that it's been hard to focus. Oh, we're lunchtime. Well, that's
So there'll be another opportunity for Q&A later, so if you didn't get a chance to ask your questions, write it down.